Hi, Julie Usher. We're back doing Fabergé egg cookies for Easter. These are an example of sandwiching technique, the sandwiching technique for building 3D cookies, insofar as the cookies are layered and stacked. You saw, or you may have seen an example of that in my previous place cards video. Here I'm taking the sandwiching technique up a notch because I'm going to build the sandwich even deeper and lay other cookies into it to create kind of a diorama effect, as you see on these Fabergé eggs that are standing out here. They're actually about 3 to 4 cookies deep, as opposed to the 2 or 3 that we saw last time. Okay, so to get started, here are the cookies you'll need, and I'll have all the exact dimensions both on the video and on my website, as well as the templates. So no worries if you don't catch them here. And I'll also be showing in my next video how to cut out some of the big window pieces because they can pose somewhat of a challenge if you're a beginner roller and cutter. So basically for this project, I want to be able to fill the interior with a fair number of cookies. So this is a big project. I use a 6-inch egg-shaped or oval-shaped cake pan, which is actually really about 7 to 8 inches from peak to peak, to cut out the window on top, the outer dimension, also to cut the outer dimension of these little rings that serve as filler pieces. And I've got 2 of them. And I also use it to cut the background, which I've iced to create a backdrop for the scenery that we're going to be stamping on there. To cut the windows in those pieces, you can use just about anything. You just want to make sure that the window you cut on the front piece is smaller than the window you cut on the inserts so that you don't see these inserts once you stack the cookie. In this case, I used a really cute little plaque cutter that was a gift from a friend for cutting the insides of the inserts. I used a standard oval cutter. I believe I got this from coppergifts.com because it's a copper cutter. And for the base, I used about a 3-inch fluted round from the standard Tico cutter set. So all in, I've got 4 cookies plus the base. And with this project, as with the place card project, before you start assembling, you want to have all the decorative elements on the front piece and also on the base done and completely dry. This was stenciled and dotted, and I'm going to show in another video how to stencil around the window because, again, that's a little bit tricky. But they're completely dry, as is the background on the cookie that I'm going to paint. And I'm going to focus in this video strictly on creating the background image, assembling and inserting some other fun little cookie pieces that were previously stamped and painted to create a little vignette. In my previous place card video, I rubber stamped and dusted. Here I'm going to actually be extending those dusts with a little bit of extract to turn them into a paint, so I'll get more precise coverage. But I'm going to be stamping exactly the same way. I've got my uninked foam pad to start, which I've inked with brown food coloring. I like to work on bubble wrap whenever I'm stamping or stenciling, just so the cookies don't slide around on me, because any kind of skidding of the cookie will blur the imprint. This is a big stamp, so I need to make sure there's good coverage on all of it. And I'm just going to put this kind of up into the top and arcing over because I'm going to fit the other cookie later to that side. But I don't want it too far to the edge because I don't want the window to cover it all. I'm pressing harder than you might think. Again, the icing underneath is completely dry, but hopefully not so dry that it cracks. I've cracked a few of these on occasion. Okay. That's pretty good. I didn't make good contact there in the stem, but that's easy enough to fix. I'm going to come back in with a really tiny paintbrush here and just fill that in. I want to see my food coloring because I need to get it on the brush here. So I'm just going to get a teeny bit here and just do some long stroke marks here to kind of fill in the stem a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I think that completes it a little bit better. Ideally, we'd let this completely dry, but we're going to go ahead and move forward. Now I'm, again, working with petal dust, as I do for dusting. These are CK Products dust, but there are so many different varieties. I'm going to make a little pink paint by mixing a touch of extract. I like extract because it evaporates quickly and there's less probability as opposed to water of it eating into the icing, because a lot of water on royal icing will dissolve it. I'm just mixing a little bit of dust with the extract rather, and the more extract you have, the more translucent the paint will be, and the more dust you have in it, the more opaque it will be. So it's a matter of kind of getting, you might have to practice a little bit off cookie to get it exactly as you want. And then, of course, the extract will evaporate as you work with it, so you do have to continually adjust the thickness of the paint as you work. And I'm just painting in between the lines, which is kind of beginner painting and really easy to do. I'm working with the peppermint extract, right now, but any flavor would work. Only a modest amount of the flavor will be picked up, but there some will be, so you might want to choose a flavor that actually corresponds with the flavor of the cookie. And I feel like it's a little too loose, so I just mixed in a little more dust to my paint. You'll see how it's a little more opaque here. And with painting, you just have much more control over where the paint goes. If you watched me dust in the previous video, you can see that the dust went everywhere, which creates kind of a romantic effect. But if you want something more precise, then painting is the way to go. And you could do different colors, but generally I like to let the underlying color dry a little bit before I apply one on top so that they don't blend together unless I want them blending together in a kind of a watercolor effect. And some irregularity in the paint is nice. Here I've got a lot of extract in it, so it's pretty pale. I'm going to come back in with a little bit more dust on the brush. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing, swap brushes and fill in green for the stem. And then lastly, I'm going to come through with a dry brush and just kind of dust the background blue to create an element of sky. And I want it really blush, which is why I'm doing it dry. This is the dusting technique. Some of this paint is still wet, so I'm going to try to keep it out of that general area because I don't really want it blending in with it. You could wait for a little longer for it to dry. And I'm being kind of random with this here because it's going to be in the background and pretty deep in the back of my egg, so it'll look more like sky too if it's uneven. But it will be less visible, so you could paint that on too if you wanted it darker. And I'm just shaking off the excess. I'm going to smooth it a little bit with my finger, actually. Okay, now we're ready. I've got my background done. I think that's good enough because the cookie that I'm going to put in the foreground will cover up a lot of that white zone, so I don't need to decorate the whole thing. For the assembly process, as with putting together most things, I just need a thick royal icing glue, and I'm using brown because I'm working with gingerbread. It just tends to blend in better. And I'm going to put down my first insert ring to create a little bit of elevation. And I only need enough inserts to create clearance for this cookie. So 2 should be just enough, I think, so that that fits in there nicely. I may have to trim a little bit of the bottom off. Okay, so we're going to put one more down. And the other thing that's important, as it was with the place cards, is to make sure all the pieces meet at the bottom because I'm going to be standing it up ultimately, and you want to make sure that they're as flush as possible at the bottom so that the thing doesn't list and tilt once you get it fully assembled. So more glue, going down for the next ring. And I won't start putting the pieces on the inside until I've got actually the top on, because that way I can get a better sense of how things are framed within the final window. So I'm bringing that top over. Again, this was stenciled around the window. The window was cut first and then I stenciled around it. And I'm going to be showing that in the next video. So you can see now perhaps why I don't put this cookie in first, because now once that's glued in, I can get a better sense of where it should be placed so that it views beautifully outside the window. So again, just more glue down. You don't need too much, but it does need to be thick, and you do want to make sure it's really making contact with the cookie. Because if it doesn't, it can skid off. So I'm over the cookie now, and I'm making sure the window is centered so that I don't see any or not much of the rings behind it. I'm testing it one more time to make sure that it's, they're flush at the bottom, because if they are, it can almost stand on its own. We won't stand it upright yet because you want it completely dry for that. Now to put in this piece, let me just fit it in here. I want to tuck it down there. I think I want to take a little bit off the bottom of it if I can, just so it tucks a little bit further down. It's hitting up against the inner part of the window. And to do that, I'm just going to gently pare it down with my paring knife. I'm going to pare through the icing, so I need to be super careful not to crack it. I'm just going to do this gradually. I mean, it will ultimately shave it off, but I just don't want to put a big crack up through the center of it because the icing's been dry for a period of time. And I think that might be enough. Trying it one more time. Yeah, that just shows a little bit more of the flower I just did. Okay, and I'm going to glue this one down with white icing just because if I need to shift it, white will clean up off that white background a lot more easily than brown will. Just shift him off to the side. Make sure he's really stuck down there and that enough of my flower is showing. I think so. I'd like to cover this seam. There's a little seam between where the green meets the white here, and I want to add a little bit more texture. So I'm going to pipe in some grass. Here again, I'm using a metal tip, so I'm working with a thick icing so it preserves the texture that I'm trying to create. And this is a grass tip, I believe it's a number 133. So I'm going to just pipe some grass up here around the bottom just to kind of conceal some of that. I'd like to show some of the stamped effects, so we'll leave that. I think I might even try to get some grass down here. And I'm kind of drawing it. I'm sideways rather than piping straight up and down to give some length to the grass. You know, an alternative if you don't have a grass tip is to just use your parchment cone. I've got a slightly darker green in here, cut a really tiny hole in it and pipe the same way. And I'm going to put a slightly darker green on top of that light green just to give it a touch more texture. So I'm just going to put a few little strokes of this darker green in here just for accent. I did that on the other eggs that you see. Okay, it's framed nicely in the window. And the last thing I think I want to do, since I've got kind of a void up here, I think I'm going to stick, rather than sticking a bow on top, I think I'm going to stick a pre-iced butterfly there, just to fill in some of that hole. I'm going to turn it towards me. I think he looks better going this direction. And again, using white, so if I have to move him, it's more easy to get that color off. Okay, so that's the assembly of the sandwiched part. This now needs to dry completely before I mount it on the round base, or things like the butterfly and this piece might fall forward. So we're going to let that, and that might take an hour or more. We're going to let that happen, and then we're going to come back and mount him on the base, and then he'll be good to go. Okay, I'm back. We've given that adequate drying time, I believe. So I've got my base here, which again is about 3 or more inches. The size of the base isn't super critical. It's just a matter of how much you want to display. And it tends to be best not to decorate it probably as heavily as I have, but to keep things pretty flat because it's just easier to secure things. But I think that'll work nonetheless. So what I'm going to do simply is a gluing technique again. And you could go either with white or dark glue here. You just don't want too much to show. And white, as I said before, is easier to get off. So I'm just gluing the contact point. And if I've sandwiched this properly, it's not going to fall back on itself altogether too easily. It's not going to lean backwards, but this one is a little bit. So we're going to prop it both in the back edge with my dragé container and in the front edge with another dragé container. And then leave this to sit until it's completely dry, and then it should be able to stand on its own. Okay, I'm back. It's been drying for a little while, and just touching it, it feels secure enough that I can remove the props and have it stand on its own. So that's the basic construction of a sandwiched diorama type cookie. In my next video, I'll be showing you how to stencil the top. And also in another video, I'll be showing you how to cut out those particular windows. Till then, live sweetly.